India is a land of faith, a place where millions search for hope, healing, and guidance. But in this very hunger for spirituality, some of the darkest stories in history have taken root. This is the story of one such cult, a cult that promised salvation, purity, and a guaranteed path to heaven. But behind its closed doors, it became a machine of manipulation, fear, exploitation, and death. They called themselves the children of the eternal light. To the outside world, they appeared peaceful, chanting hymns, performing rituals, speaking of love and purity. But inside their compound, the truth was far more terrifying. Families were separated, women were controlled, members were forced to obey the leader as if he were a god, and those who questioned anything simply disappeared. This documentary uncovers how a spiritual movement turned into a nightmare, how an entire community fell under the spell of one man, and how authorities failed to stop the darkness until it was too late. The birth of a dangerous promise. The cult did not begin as a monster. Like many dark movements in history, it started small, quietly, softly, almost innocently. It began with a man named Arvind Shastri, a middle-aged spiritual speaker from a rural district in northern India. He was not famous. He had no special qualifications, but he had one powerful gift. He knew how to speak to the broken. Arvind targeted people who were struggling, families facing financial problems, widows seeking comfort, the sick, the lonely, the spiritually confused. He spoke with warmth. He listened with patience, and he used language that made people feel seen and understood. His message was simple. Life is suffering, but if you follow me, I will show you the path to eternal light. He would sit under banyan trees holding free gatherings. Slowly, the crowds grew. People came not for rituals, but for his words. And Arvind realized something. People wanted not just God, they wanted certainty. So he offered it. He began teaching that he had received visions from a divine source. He claimed that God had chosen him to guide a select group into a new spiritual age. Those who followed him, he said, will be protected from the coming darkness in the world. Those who didn't will be left behind. Fear mixed with faith, the perfect recipe for control. Families who were suffering saw Arvind as a savior. They donated money, land, and even their time. Within 2 years, he had enough power to establish his own compound, a small gated community that he called the House of Eternal Light. Inside, everything seemed peaceful at first. Members wore white clothes, shared vegetarian meals, and prayed together. But Arvind had already laid the foundation for something far more dangerous. He formed rules, each one stricter than the last. No questioning the leader. No communication with outsiders. No private property. All earnings must be surrendered. Personal relationships must be approved by Arvind. He justified every rule with spiritual explanations. And people obeyed. What no one realized then was that Arvind Shastri was slowly building an empire of fear. One rule, one sermon, one follower at a time. This was only the beginning. The mask begins to crack. As the cult expanded, the peaceful facade that had drawn so many people in began to split open. Behind the smiling sermons and chants of eternal light, Arvind Shastri's true intentions slowly emerged, not as sudden explosions of violence, but as quiet, calculated steps that tightened his hold on every follower. The first sign came when Arvind declared that the outside world had become corrupted. He preached that modern society was filled with evil influences. Families, friends, doctors, and even government officials were agents of darkness, working to pull people away from the path of salvation. This teaching was not accidental. It was the beginning of isolation. He ordered every member to cut off all outside relationships. Mothers stopped speaking to their own children. Husbands abandoned wives who refused to join. Students left school. Workers quit their jobs. Arvind said, "Only within these walls can you find the light. The world outside is poisoned." Then came the next transformation. Obedience became worship. Arvind announced that he was not just a spiritual teacher, but a chosen vessel of divine energy. He claimed that every word he spoke came directly from higher beings. Anyone who questioned him, he said, was questioning God. People who once saw him as a teacher now fell at his feet, calling him Maharaj, Guruji, or Father of Light. This devotion was not purely spiritual. It was psychological submission. Inside the compound, the rules grew harsher. Members were required to report anyone who doubted the teachings. Daily work hours increased to exhausting levels. Meals became smaller, offered only after long prayer sessions. Sleep was restricted to keep members physically weak and mentally vulnerable. These were classic methods of control. Isolate, exhaust, confuse, and then claim to be the only source of truth. But the real fear began when Arvind created the Inner Circle, a secret group of loyal followers who enforced his rules. They monitored conversations, punished disobedience, and spread rumors that Arvind could see into people's minds. Some believed it. Some feared it. All obeyed it. Whispers began among the followers. Stories of people who tried to leave and were dragged back. Stories of punishments carried out in locked rooms. Stories of families separated for questioning the teachings. Yet no one dared speak publicly, because by now, the cult had one more powerful weapon: hope. Arvind promised that a great transformation was coming, a divine event that would lift the faithful into a higher realm. Anyone who stayed loyal would be saved. Anyone who left would be condemned. Fear kept them trapped. Hope kept them obedient. And Arvind Shastri's power grew darker every day. The rituals that could not be explained. As investigators tried to trace the true nature of the Divine Light Circle, they began to uncover the dark, hidden rituals that members had been forced to perform. Rituals that blurred the line between devotion and psychological imprisonment. For years, no one outside the cult knew what happened inside the secluded compound. Every member who joined was required to sign a secrecy oath, claiming that revealing the holy mysteries would lead to divine punishment. This fear alone kept dozens silent. But as survivors slowly began to speak, a disturbing picture emerged. The cult's doctrine revolved around a concept they called soul purification. On the surface, it sounded harmless, a spiritual cleansing, something many religions teach. But inside the Divine Light Circle, purification took on a darker, physical meaning. Members were ordered to stand in complete darkness for hours, repeating mantras until they reached a state of disorientation. Some described hearing whispers they couldn't explain, voices they were told were divine. Others said they began to hallucinate. It wasn't an accident. These were controlled sensory deprivation sessions designed to break the mind. But the most troubling ritual was something called the Gate of Surrender. According to survivors, this ritual required devotees to confess their deepest fears, sins, and secrets in front of the cult elders. The information was then used to emotionally manipulate them, making escape almost impossible. Members believed their spiritual fate, even their afterlife, depended on loyalty to the guru. Things escalated further when the cult introduced fasting purification. On certain nights, members were ordered not to eat or drink anything for nearly 24 hours while performing repetitive chanting and bowing. When questioned, leaders claimed hunger weakened the ego and allowed divine truth to enter. But in reality, it created exhaustion, vulnerability, and total obedience. Several members fainted during these sessions. Some needed medical attention, but were forbidden from seeking it, told it was a test of spiritual strength. And then came the ritual that investigators still struggle to understand: the Night of Liberation. Once every few months, followers were instructed to gather in the center of the compound, wearing only white cloths. The lights were turned off, and a burning torch was placed in the middle. The guru would appear, chanting softly. Then suddenly, the chanting would stop, replaced by silence. A silence so heavy that survivors described it as the sound of fear itself. No one knows exactly what happened during these nights, because no recording exists. But one survivor described hearing screams, not of terror, but of people losing control, breaking down emotionally, or perhaps believing they were being freed from earthly attachments. Authorities later speculated that this ritual may have been used as a method of collective psychological conditioning, similar to practices found in historical cults across the world. As these stories came out, one thing became clear. The Divine Light Circle was no spiritual movement. It was a carefully constructed psychological trap, one that operated in the shadows while presenting itself as enlightenment. The night the cult unraveled. For years, authorities knew something was wrong, but they lacked proof. Families of missing members pleaded for help. Journalists tried to investigate, but were blocked from entering the compound. The Divine Light Circle appeared untouchable, protected by its secrecy and the fear it instilled in its followers. But all of that changed on a single night that would later be known as the unraveling. It began with a phone call. A young woman, barely 19, managed to escape the compound after two of the senior members attempted to force her into a ritual she later described as the final surrender. Shaking with fear and exhaustion, she reached a nearby village and told police everything she had witnessed: the rituals, the punishments, the emotional torture. Her testimony was the first real breach in the cult's wall of silence. Authorities acted immediately. A team of officers, accompanied by social workers and a magistrate, arrived at the compound in the dead of night. They expected resistance, but what they found was far stranger. The compound was silent. No guards at the gates. No members performing their usual late-night chants. No signs of movement. When officers pushed inside, they were hit with the strong smell of incense, stronger than usual, as if dozens of sticks had been burned at once. The rooms appeared abandoned in a hurry. Bowls of food sat untouched. Lamps were left burning. Pages from spiritual books lay scattered on the floor. It was as if the entire cult had vanished. But then, in the main prayer hall, officers found something they would never forget: a large circle of white robes arranged neatly on the floor, each with a candle placed in the center. 18 robes. 18 members unaccounted for. There was no blood, no bodies, no obvious signs of escape. The robes were placed so precisely that investigators believed it had been part of a ritual, perhaps their final one. As officers searched further, they found signs that the guru and the senior members had fled only minutes before the police arrived. Ritual tools were left behind. The underground room where purification sessions were held was still warm, as if it had been in use shortly before the raid. But the most chilling discovery came in the guru's quarters. A handwritten note, written in a shaky hand, that read, "You cannot stop what is divine. The light returns elsewhere." To this day, no one knows where the guru went. Some claim he fled across the border. Others believe he continued his teachings under a new identity. A few former members whisper that he is still in India, gathering new followers quietly, rebuilding what was lost. The police operation that night exposed the cult to the entire nation. News channels reported nonstop. Survivors came forward. Families reunited with loved ones who had been trapped for years. But despite the operation, despite the escapees, despite the evidence, the 18 missing cult members were never found. And the mystery surrounding their disappearance only deepened the dark truth behind the Divine Light Circle. The hunt for the guru. After the cult compound was discovered empty, the investigation shifted focus toward one man, the guru known only as Mahadev Ji, the spiritual leader who had engineered the Divine Light Circle from the ground up. To his followers, he was a savior. To investigators, he was a manipulator with extraordinary psychological control. Police believed that if they could find him, the entire mystery, especially the disappearance of the 18 members, might finally unravel. But Mahadev Ji had planned his escape long before authorities arrived. A master of disguise. According to survivors, the guru was not the mystical figure he pretended to be. He had a long history of reinventing himself, moving from state to state, adopting new identities, and gathering isolated or vulnerable individuals. Each time suspicion grew, he vanished and reappeared in a new form. He had been a healer in one town, a meditation teacher in another, a prophet in a remote village. He was a ghost who changed shape, and the police realized they were dealing with a seasoned manipulator who understood how to disappear into the countless corners of India. Following the money trail, detectives shifted their strategy. If they couldn't track him physically, they would follow the cult's finances. They discovered that the Divine Light Circle had collected millions of rupees in donations, none of which were traceable through normal banking routes. Instead, the money flowed through a network of shell accounts and fake charities registered under false names. One lead pointed to a quiet town in Uttarakhand, where a suspicious transaction had been recorded just days before the raid. When police followed the trail, they found a small ashram, abandoned, yet fully stocked with supplies. It appeared to have been prepared for a new cult base. They were always one step behind him. Sightings across India. Reports of the guru began surfacing everywhere. A man matching his description seen boarding a bus to Himachal Pradesh. A traveler claiming a holy man performed a ritual for him near Rishikesh. A shopkeeper insisting she sold food to a bearded stranger who spoke like a spiritual teacher. None of the sightings were confirmed. Every clue ended in uncertainty. Some investigators began to suspect that the cult wasn't disbanded. It had scattered, operating silently, waiting for instructions from their missing leader. The Whisper Network. Even as police hunted for Mahadev Ji, rumors spread on the dark corners of social media, private forums, encrypted groups, anonymous posts. Some claimed the guru was building a new circle of devoted followers. Others believed he was preparing for a ritual that required the 18 missing members. One post, written anonymously and quickly deleted, read, "The circle never ends. It only moves." Authorities couldn't verify it, but the message haunted them. The investigation stalls. Months passed, and despite the national search, Mahadev Ji remained untraceable. His face had been broadcast across every news channel. His description circulated through every police department. Yet not one solid lead emerged. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, much like the followers who disappeared with him. The public began to ask the question authorities feared the most. Was this the work of a criminal mastermind, or something far more organized? The hunt for the guru became one of the most baffling manhunts in modern Indian crime history. The final revelation. Months turned into years, and though the Divine Light Circle was no longer active in the open, its shadow continued to haunt investigators, survivors, and families of the missing. But what happened next would push the case far beyond anything anyone expected and reveal a truth darker than the cult itself. A breakthrough from an unexpected source. The investigation had slowed. Leads dried up. The guru remained a ghost. Then, unexpectedly, a breakthrough came not from police work, but from a survivor who had recently regained enough strength, mentally and emotionally, to speak freely. This survivor, once one of the guru's most loyal followers, revealed something no one had mentioned before. A secret underground chamber beneath the compound, deeper than the purification room, that authorities had already found. According to her, this chamber wasn't used for rituals, it was used for recordings. She claimed the guru kept detailed video logs of every major ritual, indoctrination session, and confession. These recordings were not for spiritual purposes, but for control and potential blackmail. Some members had threatened to leave in the past, and those recordings were used to silence them. If the guru had such material, it meant he was more than a religious manipulator. He was building a system of power, quietly collecting leverage over dozens of people. The survivor explained that the guru had ordered trusted members to move these recordings long before the raid. She didn't know where they were taken, only that they were not destroyed. A hidden network begins to appear. With this new information, authorities revisited past leads and discovered something they had missed. Several shell charities connected to the cult were still active. Old members were quietly receiving money. Accounts that should have been closed continued to circulate funds. The Divine Light Circle wasn't dead. It had gone underground. Even more disturbing, some survivors reported receiving messages, encrypted, anonymous, always cryptic, asking them to return to the light or await the awakening. Investigators feared the cult was regrouping. The fate of the missing 18. Then came the most chilling clue. A forest officer in a remote region of northeast India reported finding strange symbols carved into trees, symbols identical to those found inside the cult's prayer hall. Nearby, he found remnants of campsites, white cloth pieces, and burnt incense. No bodies, no signs of struggle, but the ritual symbols suggested that the missing 18 might have traveled through the area. Whether they were alive, being held, or willingly following the guru, no one knew. Police searched the region for months. Helicopters were used. Villages were questioned. But the trail ended abruptly near a riverbank deep inside protected forest land. Some investigators believe the 18 followers may have died in a ritual. Others think the guru moved them to another undiscovered base. And a few, the most disturbed by the case, believe the group is still moving, relocating constantly, waiting for the guru's next command. The case that never truly closed. As the years passed, the Divine Light Circle became one of India's most infamous mysteries. Despite the media frenzy, the police operations, and the public outrage, many questions were never answered. Where is the guru? What happened to the 18 missing? What was the true purpose of the cult's rituals? And how many hidden followers still remain loyal in silence? What made the case even more unsettling was the realization that the cult wasn't built on supernatural belief, but on something far more real and dangerous: human vulnerability and one man's ability to control it. Even today, new whispers appear every now and then: a sighting, a message, a symbol, a gathering. Nothing ever confirmed. Always just enough to keep the fear alive. The Divine Light Circle didn't just disappear. It became a lingering darkness, one that still spreads quietly, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The dark truth that still lives in the shadows. The story of the Divine Light Circle is not just the tale of a cult. It is a warning, a reminder of how fear, faith, loneliness, and hope can be used as tools of control when placed in the wrong hands. The guru may have vanished, the compound may stand empty, and the followers may be scattered, but the darkness he created didn't end the night the police raided the grounds. It continues in the unanswered questions, in the families still waiting for closure, in the survivors who wake up from nightmares of rituals they can't forget, and in the 18 missing souls whose fate remains unknown. The deepest truth in this story is not supernatural, it is human. It is the truth that people searching for meaning can be manipulated into surrendering their minds, their bodies, and their freedom. The truth that one man, with charisma and calculated cruelty, can reshape the reality of dozens of people and make them believe the unthinkable. As the years pass, the Divine Light Circle remains one of India's darkest unresolved mysteries. Investigators still keep old files open. Survivors still speak in hushed tones. And every now and then, someone whispers of a sighting, a robed figure, a secret gathering, a symbol carved into a tree. Whether these signs are real or imagined, one thing is certain. The cult may be gone, but the shadow it cast still stretches across the country, and the darkness it created has never fully died. Until the missing are found, until the guru is uncovered, until the truth is exposed, the story of the Divine Light Circle remains open, a chilling reminder of how easily darkness can hide itself behind the promise of light.